Well, this is where the Lakers are right now, and it is rare for a championship team to kind of flip this whole roster. And first, we saw the move with Dennis Schröder trading for Danny Green. He replaces Rajon Rondo. Wesley Matthews was signed for the biannual exception, replaces Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Oh, we can't get him in there. Montrezl Harrell replaces Dwight Howard. Nope, touchscreen's not working, but they're in there. Trust me, they're in there. And when you look at their resume, as far as what they have with that roster, 6 roster spots open. They've got bird rights on Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They still have the veteran minimum exception, and they're $14 million below the luxury tax. They still have some work to do here, but as you could see, this roster has totally flipped. The Montrezl Harrell signing, Wesley Matthews, Dennis Schröder in the trade, and you still have, of course, LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
He's not a free agent, but he is unhappy. What's next for James Harden? How about Vince Carter on the best fit for Harden? That's later on schedule. De'Aaron Fox is their point guard of the future, agreeing to sign him to a max extension for at least $163 million over 5 seasons. His richest contract in franchise history, surpassing Chris Webber. League's reigning 6th man of the year, Montrezl Harrell, agreed to a 2-year deal with the Lakers, worth $19 million with a player option in year 2. Harrell ranked 2nd in the NBA in scoring off the bench at just over 18 points per game. And Danilo Gallinari cashed in with the Hawks, agreeing to a 3-year, $61.5 million deal. He should help an Atlanta team that shot just 33% from the 3 last season. That was the worst in the NBA. Oh, look at old Dwight Howard. I'm staying right where I belong. Laker Nation, I love y'all. Purple and gold never gets old. That's how it started. That's what he said, but what did he mean? He shuffled off to Philadelphia before the day was done.
We got just the man we need to talk to, Adrian Wojnarowski, joining us now on SportsCenter. So, Adrian, let's start at the top with the Lakers. Even as they won a championship last year, there were lots of questions about the depth and what they do outside of LeBron James and Anthony Davis. They got some answers. They added Dennis Schröder and now Wesley Matthews and Montrezl Harrell. What's going on with L.A.?
Yeah, they certainly had to address that center position once Dwight Howard headed to Philadelphia to play for Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey. And Montrezl Harrell comes from the Clippers, where he was, a very productive player. But they get him at essentially the mid-level exception, at 2 years, $19.5 million with a player option on year 2. And the priority for the Clippers was keeping Marcus Morris, and they're going to do that with a 4-year, $64 million deal, I'm told.
So Anthony Davis, no need to worry in L.A.?
Yeah, Anthony Davis will be back with the Lakers. He's going to take some time to decide, I'm told, at least through Thanksgiving next week, about how he wants to structure his deal with L.A. And, he certainly has several options in terms of the length. One option for him will be to get his contract lengthwise on par with LeBron James. That would be essentially a 3-year deal with a player option after the 2nd year, and then he and LeBron would be contractually aligned. They obviously share the same agent, Rich Paul.
All right, so meanwhile in Boston, Gordon Hayward opted out of his contract with the Celtics, but he may not be leaving. What's going on?
He still has, Hayward does, several options. His agent, Mark Bartelstein, has been talking with several teams on sign and trade scenarios where the Celtics would get back some players from, or perhaps picks from a team, and it would allow Hayward to do a multi-year, $100 million type deal, which is, he would like to get a long-term deal here. New York is offering, a bigger number on shorter years. That is an option for him. The Pacers and the Celtics had gone back and forth and talked. Gordon Hayward is obviously from Indianapolis, played at Butler. That has certainly been a scenario for him. And another scenario that remains there, Stan, is returning to the Celtics. He could re-sign with Boston. And if Boston wanted to trade him in the future, if he wanted to move on, it's a lot easier to do that down the road with Gordon Hayward if he's under contract.
The Hawks add some shooting with Danilo Gallinari, 3 years, $61.5 million. What are they thinking when it comes to roster building?
Well, this is they have a very talented young core Travis Schlenk has built in Atlanta, led by Trae Young, certainly. But they're a team that wanted to start to compete to get into playoffs. And you don't do that with young players. You do it with accomplished veterans like Gallinari, 3 years, $61.5 million for Gallo, the most ever for a player over 30 who's never played in an All-Star game. That's an interesting fact on that deal, but he is a guy who can score the ball all over the floor, and I don't think the Hawks are done. They have more cap space. There's some more veteran players out there that they would like to add. They want a team that's going to compete a little closer to that 8th seed in the Eastern Conference.
The Nets thinking even bigger than that in the Eastern Conference. They keep Joe Harris. General Manager Sean Marks said that was their biggest priority in free agency, and they got it done. Very interesting situation in Brooklyn. What's going on there?
4 years, $75 million for Joe Harris. Listen, his career has blossomed with the Nets, and he was essentially out of the league when they brought him in there, and he's turned it into a massive contract. Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant. When you have players like that who command the kind of defensive attention those two do, when you have a shooter like Joe Harris out there, it was the kind of player that Sean Marks and new coach Steve Nash did not want to lose, and they keep Joe Harris now at that $75 million deal, and you're starting to see that Nets team. They brought in Bruce Brown from Detroit, and you're seeing their backcourt. Adding some backcourt depth and then solidifying it with Joe Harris.
Meanwhile, Sacramento is convinced that it has found the centerpiece of its franchise moving forward. De'Aaron Fox, he signs a max deal, $163 million, maybe up to $200 million. So what's the thinking there in terms of building around him?
Yeah, he has been for them a high draft pick with the Kings who has developed, blossomed, and they're going to continue to build around him. Tyrese Halliburton came in the draft from Iowa State. They love the idea of playing him there. Buddy Hield in that backcourt. And now you're going to see a couple of the other rookie extensions. Jason Tatum, Donovan Mitchell. Those are two other players who are eligible for similar deals to De'Aaron Fox. And those teams now will start talking at midnight about extensions in Boston and Utah for those two young star players.
All right, it's a fluid situation. Woj, we may be back to you within the hour, so stay put.
I bet you will. See you, Stan.
Sixers and the Knicks, and Stephen A. Smith joining us now. We'll get to the Knicks in a moment, but Philly last offseason, they were very busy with deals at the start of free agency. They gave big contracts to Al Horford, Tobias Harris, max deal to Ben Simmons. Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers now leading this team. Horford is gone in that big contract. Do you expect more to be active in free agency here?
Well, first of all, that's his MO. So, of course, I expect him to be active. Secondly, and more importantly, think about what he's doing here. You add Danny Green, you add Terrence Ferguson, you definitely add Seth Curry, who's a Curry. That means he can shoot, okay? So you're trying to surround your big man, Joel Embiid, with shooters, particularly in the event that you end up losing Ben Simmons because you're going after James Harden yourself. I don't know whether that'll happen or not, but I know if I'm the Philadelphia 76ers, I certainly do not want to let James Harden go to Brooklyn. Remember, Daryl Morey was mired in the Western Conference for years, teasing about the potential championship squad that he had, but he kept running into a trifecta that he simply couldn't match up against in the Golden State Warriors with the greatest shooting backcourt in the history of basketball in Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, along with Kevin Durant. Now Kevin Durant is in Brooklyn. He's got Kyrie, and he could potentially get Harden. If you're Daryl Morey, you want to make sure you get Harden to pair him with Embiid. You might want to hold on to Ben Simmons, but I doubt Tillman Fertitta and the Rockets will let you. You'll have to give up multiple pieces, picks, and things of that nature. But again, this is Daryl Morey that we're talking about. The man doesn't stand still. He certainly isn't averse to making moves. That has been his history. I don't know if there's anybody in the league that has made more moves than him in the last 12 to 13 years. I think he's like top two in the league in the number of moves. So I think he'll try something. Whether he'll be able to pull it off remains to be seen. But clearly, with what they're doing, they want to surround Joel Embiid with shooters. And I think you know this better than most, Kevin. We love Ben Simmons. He's a star and a stud, but a shooter, he is not.
So surround him with guys that can space the floor and shoot. And meanwhile, let's talk about your Knicks. They shed some deals earlier this week. It's been a very good week in New York. Obi Toppin now coming in. Now the Knicks have $35 million in space. What do you expect to see from Leon Rose?
Well, I think they're going to go after one or two people. They're certainly going to go after Gordon Hayward. They think he fills all the boxes and he's an ideal fit for them. I'm not sure that's true, particularly since they drafted Obi Toppin and he's box office attraction and he can pretty much play that position, even though Gordon Hayward could play the 2 or the 3, as far as I'm concerned, at least on the offensive side of the floor. But I like Fred VanVleet, and I think that even though you're hearing that he'll probably re-sign and stay in Toronto with the Raptors, even though they'll be playing in Tampa at the beginning of the season, I would love to see the New York Knicks get a point guard, somebody who's a threat to score the ball, who's poised, doesn't fold under pressure, can put up points from the perimeter, and has a championship pedigree. That's Fred VanVleet, not Frank Ntilikina, which is a primary reason why Phil Jackson is no longer an executive in the National Basketball Association, because that was his draft pick. And by the way, he passed up on Donovan Mitchell in order to get that dude. Don't get me started. In the end, what it comes down to is I think you need guard play. I think you need elevated guard play. I know the Knicks like Gordon Hayward. Obviously, having $35 million in cap space, it looks like he's the guy they may go after. We don't know what that's going to materialize into. He was competing for a championship. Clearly, that's not going to be the immediate future for the New York Knicks. So I don't know whether he'll resign with Boston, go to Indiana, or go someplace else. But the New York Knicks are definitely in play. So they say. We'll see what happens with that. But I do believe Fred VanVleet should be somebody they consider if he gives any kind of indication that he's willing to consider them, because that little brother can play. He can shoot. He can run a show. He's a threat offensively from that point guard spot. And God knows they don't have that available to them right now.
He'd be perfect in New York in this system. By the way, we're not going to get you started because, it's been a good week for your Knicks. We'll see how this plays out moving forward. Thank you, Stephen A.
Freak. Once again, Giannis has some attractive options available. Again, he can sign a 5-year Supermax deal this offseason or next at over $45 million per season. Should he take a Supermax from another team next offseason, it would be just a 4-year deal at about $36 million per year, and that is significantly less. We're joined now live on SportsCenter by Stephen A. Smith. And Stephen A., you know how much Giannis could get from Milwaukee, $228 million over 5 years. So in your opinion, what should he do? Should he sign that Supermax with the Bucks or not?
Well, I'm going to always encourage somebody to take the money. Let's get that straight, Sage. You're talking about an excess of $70 million that he would be passing up if he didn't sign with Milwaukee. So we understand that. Now, obviously, a consultation or a consolation prize, rather, would be him going to a place that has no state income tax, meaning Florida or Texas. That would basically mean Miami. But I doubt that will happen. In the end, here's the big thing to peel from this. Bogdanovich, you thought you had him. But ultimately, they messed that up, because now they're being investigated for tampering charges, and that deal has fallen through. That guy can play. He is going to be somebody that adds something to the equation. Now, if he goes to Atlanta, you have nothing to worry about. But let's say, for example, somehow, some way, the Lakers are able to get their hands on him. Maybe in a sign and trade, something along those lines involving Kyle Kuzma. Then you've buffered the Lakers roster, and you've basically eliminated any chance of Milwaukee winning a championship. I'm certainly not saying that will happen, but those are the kind of things that have been discussed over the last couple of hours. In the grand scheme of things, Milwaukee is good. They're one of the elite teams in the Eastern Conference, but do we look at them and pencil them in as champions eventually? No, we do not. And that is the kind of thing you wanted to make sure you put yourself in position to be, so you can ensure re-signing Giannis. Now that that's not the case, I don't know what to make of it, because Giannis isn't talking to anybody. We presume that he will ultimately sign with Milwaukee, but we simply don't know.
Again, the addition of Drew Holiday, a good one, but is that enough for Giannis to make his decision to stay? So we'll see what he does as he stays quiet right now. Meantime, another star who recently made a big decision is James Harden, and he turned down that 2-year, $103 million extension from the Rockets. Woj reporting that his sole focus remains on the Brooklyn Nets. As for the Nets, their GM Sean Marks, he was asked earlier today about whether or not he would mortgage the team's future for a star player. Stephen A., here's his answer.
If you put it like mortgage the future, I would probably say no, right? There comes a fine line where you say, okay, look, this is what we're willing to do, not only in a trade for a star player, but every trade for that matter. We want to build something sustainable here. This is not something that's a fleeting moment, like, go all in and, a year or 2 years from now, we're sitting here going, all right, well, great. Now we got to completely rebuild all over again, and we don't have the assets to rebuild with. There's the other side where you go, look, take advantage of what we have right now and take advantage of the moment. We obviously have, a talented group that we can put on the floor as is until we know what deals are being offered or we're offering. It would be difficult to say, but by mortgaging your future, Stefan, no, we wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, Sean Marks, I don't think he said James Harden's name once at all there. Probably pretty smart, but he's talking to his fan base, his team, but also talking to the Houston Rockets, Stephen A. So what do you think the likelihood is that Harden gets what he wants and gets to Brooklyn?
Well, I still think it's a 50-50 proposition, but let's give major props to Sean Marks. I mean, he danced better than Fred Astaire, Michael Jackson, and Sammy Davis Jr. all rolled into one, God rest their souls. The fact of the matter is, when you look at what he's talking about not mortgaging their future. Karis LeVert can play. Spencer Dinwiddie can play. Jared Allen can play. And certainly you don't want to give up multiple picks. But let me remind everybody, James Harden and Kevin Durant ain't approaching 40. Both of them are age 32. They've got at least 5 years left in this league at a very elite level. But who's to say Kevin Durant's going to stay in Brooklyn for that long? Signed a 4-year deal, 3-year to opt out. He didn't play this year. He's got about 2 full seasons left. You better win a championship if you got Kevin Durant on your squad. He's coming off the Achilles. You don't know whether or not he's going to be 100%. We know Kyrie Irving is injury prone, and what you have the opportunity to get is a 3-time scoring champion, one of the most prolific scorers this game has ever seen, and he wants to come to your squad in Brooklyn, not Madison Square Garden, Brooklyn, with KD and Kyrie, and you're going to sit up there and say, we don't want to mortgage our future involving Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert. I love those players. They got a lot of promise, but they ain't KD, they ain't Harden, they ain't Kyrie. Sean Marks needs to stop that stuff and stop dancing as much as he's dancing. Or maybe he can dance and just say, hey, I'm dancing right now. Y'all figure out what the hell I want to do. But he should want to get Harden, and if he has to give up those assets to get him, you go ahead and you do it, because it's Brooklyn, it's KD, it's Kyrie, period.
Stephen A., maybe it is strategic, talking specifically to Houston, bring me something good.
Sure.
I want a deal. I mean, hey, he's smart.
That's what I mean
why
by
he's
dancing.
the GM. Exactly. By the way,
dancing.
no matter what.